This is the first section of the review for the final. In this section, we are discussing how to calculate the slope. I've done the slope so far using two methods. In the first method, I solved by making a slope triangle, and on that slope triangle, I labeled the rise and the run. The second method that I've tried is the formula method, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And then I've got two more problems that are going to be on the final that cover a slope. One of the problems, I'm given a table instead of 2 points. And using a table, I can calculate the difference between the dots a little bit more easily. So I want to do y2 minus y1. I want to figure out the difference between these 2 points, this being the second point and this being the first point. The difference between 8 and 6, that's going to be the rise, y2 minus y1. However, in a table, I'm going to be doing that over and over again. And so it makes it a little bit easier to I'm still doing y2 minus y1. I'm still going to be subtracting. But it makes it a little bit easier to do it graphically. So I'm going to draw an arrow that goes from the 8 to the 6. And that arrow has a meaning. That arrow means y2 minus y1. It means take this and subtract that. But I'm just going to be doing that over and over again. And I'm doing it so often that I'm going to create a symbol that means take the second thing and subtract the first thing. Or, in other words, find the difference between these two numbers. Now I have a special symbol that means subtract these two numbers, and that symbol is a triangle. This is called a delta. It is the Greek letter for D, and it means find the difference. So subtract the two numbers. All right, so I'm just going to be finding how much these numbers change, and that's going to be my rise. Now, the first one is between 8 and 6, so delta y. The change in y between 8 and 6. Well, am I adding or am I subtracting? From 8 to 6, I am subtracting, so it must be minus. How much do I subtract? From 8 to 6, I subtract 2. So delta y, the change in y, is negative 2, and that is my rise, because the numbers changed by that much. And then the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. It's a little bit harder because it's still delta x, it's still negative 4 minus negative 6, but it's a little bit harder to figure out if these numbers are adding or subtracting. I can look down here, and for sure from 0 to 2 it's adding 2, but it's a little bit harder to see for negative 6 and negative 4. So let's do it in detail. In other words, I'm going to go ahead and do negative 4, which is x2, minus x1, the first x, that's all x1 means, the second x minus the first x, that is what this symbol means, the change between those two numbers. So that's x2, negative 4, minus negative 6. Okay, and then just like before, the two negatives that are touching turn positive. And now I have positive 6 and negative 4, and when those come together, I have plus 2. Well, that's a little bit confusing, so let's try looking on a number line. Here's 0. Here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so to go from negative 6 here to negative 4 here, how much did the numbers change? All I'm doing is proving how much the number is changing, and I've done this whole discussion to prove to you that I am not subtracting. I know the numbers are negative, but that does not mean that I'm subtracting to get from the one to the other. I am adding 2. The difference between negative 4 and negative 6 is positive 2. I am adding 2. To get from negative 6 up to positive 4, you have to add 2. I am adding 2. To get from negative 6 to positive 4, I had to add 2. Okay, so let me clear that out a little bit. So that was a long discussion of why this was plus 2. And this was the run. And so now I'm ready to calculate the slope for these two numbers. It was negative 2. So in the first... Okay, so to find the slope, I need to divide Okay, so I'm going to show all three ways of writing this. I could say that it was y2 minus y1. I could say that it's the rise. Or I could say that it's the change in y. Now those all three mean the same thing. It's how much the numbers are changing on the y-axis. For run, I could say that that's x2 minus x1, or I could say that it's delta x, the change in x. All of those mean the same thing. No matter what I do, the rise is negative 2. I subtract 2 to get from 8 to 6, and the run is positive 2. I add 2 to get between those two. And that means that my slope is negative 2 over positive 2, and that can be simplified. Negative 2 divided by positive 2 is, negative by a positive is negative, 2 divided by 2 is 1. Okay, so this one could be simplified. And then I've got one more problem that I wanted to do. Again, that's 3 methods of calculating the slope so far. I can do it with a slope triangle by calculating the rise and the run. I can do it with an equation, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Using a table, I can look for the change in the numbers in the table. And then here I'm back to, this is going to be a graphical method. And using the graphical method, I'm going to draw a slope triangle. Okay, the first step is to pick points that are exactly on a grid line, or as close as I can get. The first point would be here, and another point, a good point would be right there. Okay, and then I don't have to connect those, but it's a good idea to connect those using a triangle. And the only reason I do that is so that it's more easily visualized what the rise and the run are. Okay, so this is called a slope triangle. Now I'm going to calculate the rise and the run. The rise was the distance up and down, and the run was the distance side to side. And the only thing that's complicated about this is that the numbers here on the side are not 1, 2, 3, 4. The interval here is 500. So I need to take that into account when I'm calculating the rise. To go from the bottom to the top here is, I just about made a mistake there. So this line going from left to right does not go up, this line goes down. Okay, so starting from the left and going to the right, this line goes down. And so the rise, the difference between 3,000 and 2,500 is negative 500, and I do have to include the units, yards. Okay, and now the run is still the distance side to side, but this time the interval is not 1. It doesn't go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes 2. So the interval is 2. And I need the difference between 0 and 10. The difference between 0 and 10 is 10. 10 minutes. So I'm going to use MIN for that. And the last thing I need is the rise over the run. So that's negative 500 yards per 10 minutes. And this can be simplified. There's a common factor of 10, and I can tell because there's a 0 on both of these things. Now 500 divided by 10, anytime you divide by 10 you lose 1 0. So I'm going to cancel out that 0 and I'm left with negative 50. Negative 50 yards per minute. Okay, so the only difference between this one and the previous ones is that it's in context, which means that you need to have the units here and you need to pay attention to the interval. The interval here is not 1. And that's the end of this section. So I'll see you in a second for the next section. And in the next section, we're going to be using our calculation of slope. In the equation mx plus b, we're going to be putting the slope into this, and so the only thing we need is the intercept b.